Recruit them right, retain them forever. I think it's important that as we talk about the recruiting function, we really look at it as a full circle of attracting people to our organization, converting them. And by converting them, I mean moving them from being a candidate to an employee and ultimately retaining them. We often lose that last piece of the puzzle, and it's really important. I tell people when I talk about recruiting all the time that it's far simpler to retain current top talent than to go out and look for new great employees. I do think it's always important to talk about how recruiting differs from succession planning. And today we're really going to focus on recruiting, which is the shorter term process that talks about the need to fill a position that's already vacant. Succession planning, I do have a couple slides on succession planning and we'll touch on that, but really is part of your career pathing performance management program, where you are really ensuring that you have great talent in the organization to move into further positions. So what have I seen that's really changed today? The old paradigm of recruiting was hiring, and that was a really quick turnaround, fill a seat, get a warm body into the organization, place an ad, start interviewing people. A lot of hiring managers used to just use a gut feel as a way to understand who they were going to hire, and then we just got people working. Today, we like to talk more about strategic staffing. And when we say strategic staffing, we really want to tie our hiring processes to the strategic plan of your company. So hopefully all of you have the opportunity to be part of your organization and understand where you're going so that you can set your recruiting programs up to hire the kind of people you'll need in the future. We spend more time, but we make sure that we find the right person. And we create more of an alignment between our entire organization and the candidates out there in a hopes of connecting with the right people and retaining the kinds of employees that we want to retain. So one of the things when we look at recruiting, we have to always remember the legal issues that really impact our recruiting processes. We all are aware of the idea of employment at will. This varies a little bit state by state of what you have to tell people, but employment at will is the idea that when you hire someone, you can get rid of them at any time. Title VII is the Discrimination Act, and this is really starting to play more and more into our recruiting conversations that we're having internally. And hopefully, as people who do a lot of recruiting, you're really educating your managers on how Title VII impacts them and impacts the decisions of who they're going to hire. The American with Disabilities Act is something that we may forget about on occasion, but it's important that as recruiters, you always have in the back of your mind where you might interview a candidate who comes with a certain physical disability. Do you have the ability to interview someone who's hearing impaired? Do you know how you're going to handle that going forward? And these are things that you also have to make sure that your managers are really aware of. USERA is the idea that all people have equal access to our hiring processes, and you want to make sure we see this coming in as we talk about pre-employment testing in a little bit. And then, of course, the whole idea of negligent hiring. And the idea of negligent hiring is that you are responsible to make sure that the people that you're bringing into your organization are safe for the other people around you. So we see negligent hiring to be a piece when we start talking about reference checking. One of the things that I find is really important is setting up the right expectations of your organization with the recruiting process. And you as the recruiter are taking a step back and you are looking at the first box here, the organizational life cycle. You are going to hire a different kind of candidate when you are in the startup or growth phase of your business versus a candidate when you are in the maturity or decline phases. You're looking for people with different skill sets, different competencies, different ways of impacting your organization, depending on where you are in the organizational life cycle. You also want to look at what gives your organization its competitive advantage. And this is where we look at recruiting as a real alignment to the strategy of your organization. In the competitive advantage phase, we want to look at what really makes us who we are in the market. If we are going to market with price, and that's all that matters to get our product out the door, we're going to be hiring very different people than if our competitive advantage is in fact our people. The final piece is that compensation structure piece. And it's really important to understand as recruiters what your compensation philosophy is as a business. So do you lead the market? I.e., do you pay very high salaries? Are you at the average? Or do you lag the market? So it's important that as recruiters, you all are really aligned with what it's going to take to get the kind of people that your strategy says that you want to have. Hopefully, you all have these different pieces in your job descriptions. As far as the legal components for creating job descriptions, we really want to make sure that the job descriptions accurately reflect the real requirements of a candidate. Some of you may be familiar. There's a program that I love for those of you who don't have job descriptions called Descriptions Now. It's very inexpensive and it's a great online tool that will write job descriptions for you. So you can just Google Descriptions Now. If you don't have job descriptions or yours need to be revamped, that's a great tool to use. So the first thing to think about when you're looking for sourcing external candidates is active versus passive. Passive candidates means going into a database, searching for candidates, and then reaching out to those people. It can be a very time-consuming process that often I don't feel yields huge results, but where you're going to want to really consider passive candidates is where you have positions open that need very, very specific skills. Same with networking. You want to go out to your community on LinkedIn, on Facebook, anywhere else, and let them know the jobs you have available. Also, I like to remind people, don't forget about non-traditional candidates. So the older workforce are people that are still really very able to be out there working. They may just not want the high-level stress jobs they used to have. So go to some of the senior centers, go to some of the events where if you have a job that you could have 2 part-time workers, really think about that as an option. Certainly look at the unemployed. The ranks have gotten smaller, but we certainly want to consider those people. Also look at those that might have different disabilities and handicaps that might be easy enough to work with in your organization and tap into them. Really show your positions to the people out there. And then think about programs in your own state or local community where you might be able to get a tax advantage if you hire someone who's currently on some sort of public assistance. Interns, you definitely want to use them, but make sure you are up on the new legal issues that about paying interns and not paying interns. You want to make sure that you're doing that properly. So let's talk about actually writing the ad. What I see so often is that recruiters just essentially put up a job description. And I really want to encourage you to think about your ad as a marketing piece. I really believe that every job ad needs to start with a headline and it needs to have a hook. So I like to start my job ads with questions. I typically start with, are you ready to take your customer service career to the next level? Would you like a position that allows you autonomy and decision making? Make sure that you're being honest and truthful about what they'll be able to do if they accept this position and join your company. But really think about that catchy headline. Then you want to go right into the benefits of the position. And by benefits, I don't mean health insurance. I mean the benefit that somebody would have if they chose to work in this role. So really think about that. Then I go into the key elements of the position. What are we in fact looking for? And I really don't start describing the company until the end of the ad. Now, if any of you are with a company that's a really top, let's say you work at Google or you work for one of the companies that like Zappos, that's really known as having this amazing culture. You may want that in your headline. But for most of us, we work at organizations that are a little ho-hum, that may not even be known to the typical candidate until they start investigating. And so I always, of course, include company information, but I just don't see that as the highlight. Then, of course, I talk about the requirements for the position. What do we really need to have in order to move on to the next step with you? And then always don't forget about your contact information. And yes, telephones do still have a purpose. Now, the purpose is not for you to put your phone number in the ad, but I think it's really, really critical as you go through the resumes and think about the candidates that you have a phone screen with anyone you think you might bring into your organization. The reason this is so critical is because you really need to understand what this person is looking for before you decide to bring them in. Once you bring people in, you've got to start asking interview questions. And the last 5 or 8 years, we've talked about what we call behavioral-based interview questions. Behavioral-based interview questions try to get at how the employee or the candidate has acted previously when they're in the same role. And if you look at these questions, they're all about tell me a story, tell me a time when, give me an example. You get a real story of how this person has acted. I also want to make sure that we're all cognizant as we're creating interview questions of what's legal and what's illegal, because a lot of interview questions can be illegal. So for instance, it is illegal to ask, do you have to pick children up at daycare? But it is okay to ask, we often work past 6 p.m. Is that an issue for you? Another question might be, what country are you from? There is no scenario under which it's okay to ask that question. But it is okay to ask, are you fluent in any other languages? Now, you must ask the question about languages of all candidates. So you can't just ask candidates with typically Hispanic last names if they speak Spanish. You'd have to ask that question of everybody. We can't ask people, do you have any disabilities? But again, going back to the job description, we can ask if there are any essential functions that they're unable to perform. And finally, you are never allowed to ask someone if they're a citizen of the United States, but you can ask if they're legally eligible for employment. Now, there are a couple of caveats for citizenship if you have a government contract that would require your employees to be U.S. citizens, and some of those do exist. Then you can ask about citizenship, but it's in very rare cases. So this is another slide that you might want to talk to your internal management team about, because if they're out there doing the interviewing and you're not in the room, you want to make sure that they've been trained on these kinds of questions. It is critical in the recruiting process that you are verifying that the information these candidates give you is correct. Background checks are getting more and more controversial, and you are going to each have to check with the state in which you operate what constraints might exist on background checks. Always be sure to verify education. Credit checks, much like background checks, are very limited these days. Medical exams might make sense. Where I find medical exams are really helpful. The issue with drug testing is becoming an issue with the new medical marijuana laws. And then finally, reference checks. Some people think reference checks are a waste of time. I think it's important to at least verify that they have in fact worked at each of the places they say they've worked previously. Job offer letters. I'm going to whip through this again. I want you to think about this slide more as a way to assess your job offers and make sure that they're being written in a way that I think makes sense. Make sure that do understand that you are not legally obligated to provide a job offer in writing. So you don't have to be doing job offers. But many candidates want a written job offer before they quit their other job. Also remember to communicate with anyone who does not receive the job. Now, my recommendation to you is that I always hold at least one candidate that I do not tell they haven't gotten the job until my first choice candidate has accepted, I've got it signed, I am sure that they're starting. Because you often have to go back to that second candidate. And unfortunately, it's sort of embarrassing if you've already told them they weren't selected and now they know they're your second choice. So I do tend to try to put them off a little bit until I'm absolutely sure our first choice has in fact accepted our position. Now, I want to make sure that we talked a few minutes about retention. And I think career pathing, and I think that's a word I just made up, but career pathing is the idea of making sure that your employees really understand where they can go in your organization. And that's going to create a really good commitment for retention. The way I like to do with this is to start by identifying the top talent in your organization on your own. You go through and really decide who your top performers are. And I think these 6 issues are the 6 issues that we really want to look at. Who has the behavior, the potential? They need the basic talent. Are they engaged? Are they ambitious? And does their performance support what we need them to do? And I've created this chart that I think can be really helpful as far as mapping out which employees have what you need in your organization. So I really encourage you to go through this process, maybe not with every employee, but maybe your top 15%, and then sit down with the employees that you've really identified as top talent and let them know that they have a long-term future with your organization. And also sit down with those employees that don't have aren't bubbling up to the top, and let them really understand what they need to do to get to the next level in your organization. And this may also tell you that they may just not be a long-term player for your group. But I think it's important that we identify that top talent, and we really want to know who we want to retain. So we don't necessarily want to retain everybody. Some amount of turnover is actually a really good thing. Finally, I just like you to remember where we began, bring everything full circle, and realize as recruiters, while it's our primary goal to attract great candidates to our organization, we have to be able to convert them to employees and then retain them to stay in our organization. And this is what's going to make your recruiting process and the recruiting puzzle really a top-notch piece of your organization and your HR function.